Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We now move to our third and final panel of the day, titled Multilateralism and Knowledge in the Global Water Dialogue, the UN and the Role of Think Tanks in Promoting SDG 6. This panel will be moderated by Mr. Abdulla Khaja, researcher at Trends Research and Advisory. Please join me in welcoming Abdullah and our distinguished panelists.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you had a wonderful lunch. SDG 6, titled Clean Water and Sanitation, of course, aims to ensure the availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. And without further ado, let me introduce our esteemed panelists joining us today. Christophe Hodder, the United Nations Climate Security and Environmental Advisor to Somalia. Ms. Laura Birkman, Director of the Climate, Water and Security and Food Security Program at the Hague Center for Strategic Studies. Mr. Desigan Naidu, Climate Adaptation Advisor to the South African Climate Commission and Head of the African Climate Risk and Human Security Project at the Institute for Security Studies. Dr. Amr Al-Kindi, former lead climate adaptation negotiator during the COP28 UAE presidency. And last but not least, Sultan Majid Al-Ali, researcher, head of the Global Barometer Department and deputy head of the Dubai office sector, as well as being co-author of the book titled Climate and Regional Geopolitical Drivers, Water in the MENA Region. Thank you all for joining us today. Starting off with Mr. Christophe, as the United Nations advisor in Somalia, what are the main initiatives which the United Nations has supported there? And how do you evaluate the impact of these initiatives?
Great, thank you. I'll start at a sort of global level and then go regional and then right down to the sort of local level. So I'm part of the Climate Security Mechanism, which is a UN organization of 4 different organizations that helps support at the international level the issues of climate peace and security. And obviously water and water security and water conflict is one of the sort of central points to that. So what we try to do is we try to support, influence, and broker these discussions on climate peace and security at the Security Council and at a lot of international events. So the UN tries to bring together people, and thanks to UAE for supporting the Joint Steering Committee in 2025 of the Climate Security Mechanism. But through that, we then try to deploy advisors like myself to specialist areas like Somalia, like Afghanistan, like Iraq, and a lot of other countries. So then there are 6 or 7 of us globally around the world that try to help on this interlink between climate change, insecurity, and instability. And obviously water is one of the central parts of that. And so after that global level, there's this more regional level. So in the Horn of Africa, we have the Climate Security Mechanism Hub, which tries to work with Horn of Africa countries, specifically on this issue of climate, peace and security. And part of that is about bringing people together. It's about convening. It's about bringing discussion. It's also about bringing in the science. So this is where, organizations like yourselves and, other think tanks, it's really important that they come together to use that information and that knowledge to try to influence the policy and the politics. So the UN plays quite a central role of the sort of collaboration, the convening, but equally around trying to bring together that knowledge and information. And right at the local level, I'm the climate security advisor for Somalia. And so what we try to do is, at the local level, is also bring together think tanks, local Somali think tanks, but equally regional and global think tanks, to look at this issue of water, peace and security, transboundary, but equally around how it plays into local and national politics and how it all plays together in terms of different adaptation methods. And how do you bring together these ideas of climate change and the more sort of insecurity politics part? So, for example, we've been doing this big program over the last couple of years called the Johar Off-Stream Reservoir Program, where we're trying to renovate a big piece of infrastructure which will help not only during the dry seasons, so it's a storage program for water, but it will also help during when there's lots of water, during the rainy seasons. And so the idea behind it is to try to bring together this concept of a climate adaptive approach, but equally looking at a peace building and peace approaches. Now, one of the issues from the previous panel was about this issue of conflict and climate, and I think that what this program tries to look at is bringing that together in a real, interesting, concrete solution. But we have, there is a lot of problems in terms of funding, the new multilateralism global part of this. But I think a lot of it is trying to be adaptive, learn new ideas, and trying to find some new ideas together. So yeah, that's what we're trying to do.
Perfect. Transitioning over to Ms. Laura, who will be presenting her own presentation. Can be put on screen, please?
Thank you, and I hope everyone can hear me. So first of all, it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you, Abdulla, for moderating this important panel, and thank you to Trends Research for the invitation and opportunity to be here today. Just to start off, and this morning I think illustrates very well that there seems to be, I think, an increased awareness that water can mean survival, dignity, and cooperation, but it also can mean tension, forced migration, and insecurity. And the difference here is really how we manage water stress. So that's why we must see water not only as a development issue, but also as a peace and security challenge. So accelerating SDG 6, which seeks to ensure safe drinking water and sanitation for all, focusing on the sustainable water management of water resources, wastewater, and ecosystems, requires really more than technical fixes. We need, and it's just been reiterated by my neighbor Christophe, integrated approaches that link water challenges to broader risk factors so communities can act faster and more deliberately. So knowledge institutes like my own, the Hague Center for Strategic Studies, design tools and methods to support sustainable water management, but we also need to do that with larger entities like the United Nations, who have the convening power to bring together diverse stakeholders in hotspot regions of risk. So progress is happening, but silos remain a challenge. Just to reiterate the issue, I think most of us are aware of them, but just to make the point quite clear in the context of my presentation, in order to understand the risk, we need to look at how this environmental risk issue has been trending over the last years. And if we look at this year's World Economic Forum report, Global Risk Report, and it has done this report for many years now, we see that even with rising peace and security challenges that are separate or considered separate from climate change or environmental risk, the 2025 report shows that the most sort of severe long-term risk continues to be environmental. Yet, water-related security risks are not just a distant threat. They are already urgent, especially in regions like the MENA. And it is here where I think we need to get much clearer about where we can intervene in a way that we can address those more acute forms of that challenge. So in the MENA region in particular, water scarcity is increasingly a driver of instability and fragility. Climate-induced water stress collides with fragile governance, migration, and political tensions. And today, 83% of the MENA population faces extremely high water stress, and by 2050, that number could reach 100%. And this convergence really threatens both regional stability and progress towards the SDGs, particularly SDG 6. So in order to address these challenges, and not just in the MENA, but also elsewhere, my institute has been bridging research and action through its climate, water, and food security program. And specifically, we work on data-driven research and methods that help to unpack complex dynamics between water and climate-related issues and their security implications. We develop both quantitative and qualitative tools that can be applied in hotspots of risks that help communities and decision makers better understand and navigate those water conflict dynamics. A premier initiative that we are involved with is the Water, Peace and Security Partnership. Launched already in 2018, this platform brings together 6 organizations with expertise in water governance and ecosystem management, data collection and modeling, geopolitical due diligence and security risk assessment, and as well peace building and conflict-sensitive programming. In this mix, HCSS, my think tank, is the expert on the security component of the Water, Peace and Security Nexus. And through research, foresight tools, learning platforms, regional and local collaborations and dialogues, the partnership shows how we can shift from what we call a conflict trigger related to water to a foundation for better cooperation and resilience. Let me help you go through what the main sort of mission is of the partnership, and then I will proceed to just explain the approach and the activities that we do. So the main mission of Water, Peace and Security is to turn the vicious water conflict cycle into a virtuous cycle of sustainable water management and peace. And here you see on the left-hand side how that vicious cycle from water-related mismanagement to conflict can actually be turned around through better, more constructive collaboration on water management, leading to better cooperation and ultimately peace. And we do this by linking anticipation, action, learning, and dialogue so that interventions can reduce conflict potential, address instability, and foster cooperation on the ground. So the initiative is structured around 4 pillars. They're called Understand, Mobilize, Learn, and Dialogue. And in their interaction, they form what we call ACT, or a framework for turning knowledge into action. So the first pillar, Understand, is about identifying risks and hotspots using early warning tools, system analyses, and research. And then we address, using that information, the mobilization pillar, which is basically working closely with governments, NGOs, civil societies, and what we call the 4D communities that have a stake in these water, peace, and security developments. And this is mainly, in our approach, those practitioners that are working in development, diplomacy, disaster relief, and defense. A third pillar is about learning. It's about really building local capacity, but also national level capacity with training, e-learning, and workshops. And last but definitely not least is the dialogue pillar, where we facilitate multi-stakeholder forums, scenario planning, and participatory analyses to really bring together those actors that might have a difference of opinion or a different way of looking at a particular problem, and using those evidence-based tools and methods, but also techniques, to come to a better and shared understanding of the issues. So we provide advisory services globally, but also engage in country-specific programs on the ground. And we see here a number of countries illustrated. So we work in Iraq, in Kenya, in Ethiopia, and in Mali. We also have done activities in Chad and Niger and in Jordan. And we are increasingly working with water experts, government officials, and humanitarian actors that are engaging in other regions around the world. The recent partnerships that we've engaged with include a 5-year memorandum of understanding with the International Red Cross, but we also work with national governments and specifically diplomats to support their work and their efforts to really get a better grip on water-related instability. Recently, we developed, in coordination with the Red Cross, also specific work programs with national societies, national Red Crescent societies, to help enhance their portfolios with tools and instruments to support the addressing of more resilient-oriented water interventions that look beyond disaster relief to really build resilience. So very briefly, our tools are integrated, informed, and inclusive, and they operate both at the global and regional levels. We have a global early warning tool that actually uses machine learning and AI to identify where hotspots of risks are emerging. And we do that up to 12 months in advance. And then based on that early warning tool, we develop context-specific action plans to engage on the ground with those actors that are involved in those specific regions. And the overall goal, of course, is to make sure that those activities are launched before tensions or conflicts might escalate into a negative spiral. So my final slide, a summary of the pillars that Water, Peace and Security is working on, but also in terms of its ambition to really combine and integrate early warning and research, turning evidence into action, supporting training and capacity development, and ultimately build trust and collaboration. And in their combination, we hope that, and we seek that water programming becomes more anticipatory, conflict sensitive, and sustainable. To conclude, accelerating SDG 6 requires breaking down those silos and fostering cross-sector collaboration that up until now is one of the main barriers for progress, also within the SDGs themselves. Water can either fuel conflict, instability, or drive peace. And there are many examples, and they were mentioned all throughout the morning, that really provides us with hope that these methods can be further fostered and scaled. So with evidence-based research, foresight, dialogue, and cooperation, I think we can really make water much more a foundational source for resilience and accelerate sustainable water management. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Laura. Now going over to Mr. Naidu. As the Climate Adaptation Advisor to the South African Climate Commission, Presidential Climate Commission, I wanted to get your perspective on the current events and trajectories when it comes to geopolitical domain. What impact does that have when it comes to the multilateral agenda for water?
Thank you, Abdulla, and hello, everyone. I think that the first point to make is that the water agenda as we currently understand it in the world are actually defined by multilateral agreements. And the ones that you pick up automatically around where we are, one is the Millennium Goals, and the Millennium Goals come out of the Millennium Summit. And then the SDGs, and the SDGs have come out of the Sustainable Development Summit. And they are both then refined on the back of the climate agenda. And while COP28 has been, I think, quite catalytic around bringing it together, they've been running close to one another for quite a while. I mean, some of the history goes back to COP17 and a little bit before that. But having said that, there are a couple of issues that we have to be rather direct about. The first is that in the current geopolitical climate, the multilateral system is under attack. And even before it was under attack and had less ability to achieve the actions that it wanted to, it was already lagging behind. I mean, the latest estimates on SDG 6 is that on drinking water, we have a 27% deficit. If you look at the wastewater suite, that goes to over 50% as your deficit. And if we look at the implementation of integrated water resource management, it's around 57% as a deficit. So it was already in trouble. And the current challenges of the multilateral system just puts it a little bit further over the edge. So I guess the question is, in the current environment, because the repairs are not easy to see in the short term, what are the remedies? And the remedies relate to a bunch of other sectors that are ambling along on the back of either lead governments in several parts of the world, and the UAE has certainly played its part in one or two of these matters. But over and above that is the prominence of now minilaterals in a multipolar world that are becoming increasingly significant. And here we're seeing, and there are many around the world, and this week's conversation is a lot around the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, but there is a G7 agenda around climate and water. There is an increasing BRICS plus agenda around climate and water, and organizing for a rethink around how you use these new vehicles, either temporarily while the multilateral system organizes for an evolution into a more powerful state, or even for a much longer term, organizes for the kind of cooperation and resource sharing that allows a global agenda to get back on track. But there is a very specific difficulty associated with all of this, and that specific difficulty is around resourcing and financing. This already had much difficulty in the multilateral system, and some of the things that we can take away from other sectors, like climate, is how you can reorganize the thinking around that to be much more positive around water. And the thing that pops out really, really strongly is the kind of finance innovation that has been at play around the climate discussions, but are clearly applicable in much the same way around water. The blended finance options, the new mechanisms around how to accelerate those options. In fact, what we need for water is the water equivalent of the Bridgetown agenda. This is what will take it back on track in a serious way. And one way to look at it, and I'll refer to a remark that was made by Liam Fox earlier this morning when he said that when you look at the SDGs, the number one SDG should be water. It actually is. Because the combining narrative across all of the SDGs is in fact water. Another point that was made, I think this time by Ashok, is that the whole notion of water wars are hardly new. As a strategic asset, we've been fighting about water for as long as we've been around as Homo sapiens sapien. It is also true that water has been one of the fundamental tools that has brought people together around cooperation, around peace building, and even around building our legal system. In many of our societies, water laws were the first laws that actually existed. So in the same kind of way, Abdulla, maybe water too can be the tool through which we can rebuild the multilateral system that we want.
Thank you, Mr. Naidu. Very insightful look into, of course, the financing, as already mentioned by Christophe. Transitioning over to Dr. Amr, as the former negotiator of the climate adaptation negotiator at COP28, of course, you had an insider's view of the use of multilateral diplomacy and how it is used to address such a global challenge. Tell us about your experience and its relevance today when it comes to climate challenge as well as water security.
Thank you, Abdullah, and thanks to Trends Research for this opportunity to speak at this conference. Going back to COP28, as a presidency negotiator, I had a front row seat during the negotiations, and I've witnessed myself how the COP28 presidency harnessed multilateral diplomacy through intense efforts to achieve a remarkable outcome at the end of COP28. Throughout the year leading to COP28, all the way to the last minute of the COP28 event in Dubai, the COP28 presidency engaged in intense and relentless multilateral and bilateral diplomatic efforts at every level, from head of state level to ministers to heads of delegations to technical negotiators to non-parties as well, with NGOs, media, civil society, youth, indigenous people, local communities, women groups, environmental NGOs, all kinds of civil society representatives, and also used every opportunity available before COP28. Different regional climate weeks, climate dialogues, informal consultations with negotiating groups and parties, G20 platform, even G7. We were invited to the G7 as a presidency, and other events in order to, to build connections with all the actors, state actors and non-state actors, private sector as well, and B, to build trust, and to listen to all the participants and understand their different perspectives about how climate action should take place, but also to build a common understanding of a common set of objectives and a vision for COP28. And to do all of this in an inclusive and transparent manner, and to be accessible as a presidency to everyone and anyone who has anything to do with climate action throughout the year leading to the COP. All these multilateral diplomatic efforts culminated in the adoption of the historic UAE consensus at the end of COP28, which was a big achievement for the presidency and for the world, keeping the goals of the Paris Agreement alive. I'm glad that this morning His Excellency Abdulla mentioned the UAE consensus and its relevance to water security. I strongly believe that active and engaged multilateral diplomacy is key to address any global issue, not just climate change, but also water security. And COP28 UAE presidency and the experience and its experience in engaging in multilateral diplomacy offers a lot of lessons to learn from for anyone who's involved in addressing water security today.
Thank you, Dr. Amr. And moving on to Sultan, who will also be presenting his own presentation.
Thank you, Abdullah. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to be with you among pioneer researchers and officials and one of the most crucial and important topic. My role is about to speak how think tank can play a supportive role in supporting SDG 6. Therefore, I'd like to start with the rule of 3. As a human beings, we can survive only in 3 minutes without air, 3 days without any water, and 3 weeks without any food. And allow me to say why. In the times of a crisis, when Hurricane Katrina hit the United States back then, the American soldiers and the armed forces managed to give water by day 3. And same thing applies in Japan. In 2011, the unit had to take 3 days to give water for those who were impacted by that disaster. This reminds us of a saying that's widely known, I think, which is, we need to fix the roof while the sun is still shining. The other thing is that it's part of our human nature that we act a bit late. Therefore, in the times of a crisis, it's crucial that we prepare ourselves for such an occasion. Now, the other dimension is there are a global water challenge that everyone has to speak quite in a very fruitful way. There are like 1 billion people still lack access to safe drinking water. 2 billion people are lacking sufficient water for their basic sanitation. And yearly, around 3 million children die from waterborne diseases. So water scarcity is not a huge, it's a big deal in the Middle East, and especially in the Middle East where it combines three or several factors like the economic challenge, societal challenge, and also an area where there is a conflict in almost every single corner. Therefore, it's really important to think about the usage of water. For example, in the GCC, this is one of the things that I think Professor Asad had discussed in Expo, which is a couple of years ago. In the GCC, one person used 7 liters per day, 700 liters per day, whereas the studies and the sufficient way is 75. So on the GCC particularly, we are using much more water than the usually thing. The same thing applies when it comes to the water losses. Now, when it comes to the water losses, the rusty pipelines and the absence of management of using the water is also play a huge contribution in this. Whereas 35 to 30% we are losing the water. Where regularly in Tokyo and Malaysia, I think it's 8% only. And allow me to share you one of the small stories that I have seen. I went to Norway, I went to several countries in Europe, and I thought they might have some challenges, but water scarcity is not among them. But while I was preparing for this event and the conference, I've seen the opposite thing. Because according to the exploitation index shows that there are 20% of territory and 30% of the population face water stress every single year. The biggest user of that water is the energy sector and the agriculture sector. And to give you an example about it, you see the French river Rhône, I think, supplies around 70% of its withdrawal to nuclear plants for cooling system. And this is one of the huge impact on Europe and UK, despite they are one of the richest countries that we see with the water. The other element is that the transboundary water agreement. Most of those transboundary agreements were written in a time where there was climate change was something called low politics, which doesn't have to be an action today. It was in the late 1990s, which is most of the countries started to flourish economically and after the fall of Soviet Union and this stuff. And one of the aspects that we see is it still has many gaps. For example, the upstream countries control the downstream countries. And there is something called like the upper power asymmetry, which plays a huge impact on this, on this issue. Often people, when we see the dialogue about politics and MENA and everywhere else, one of our biggest mistake and our biggest fault that we take water as oil and gas. The same thing applies. This is a total different thing. We can't live without oil and gas. I mean, we are Emiratis, we've done it once. But it will be rough, yes, but we've done it once. But without any water, it's a disaster. Therefore, we are driving ourselves and luring ourselves into a disastrous situation. So what is particularly the role of a think tank? It's mainly that we have to provide evidence-based insights. We have to have a contribution between the private sector, governmental sector, and something that has an evidence we can see and we can measure. Also, we have to multifaceted evidence. Now, thankfully, we have, in the global barometer, for example, we count very largely on the qualitative data. And our colleague in the other sectors are dealing with other data type. And also, what's quite important is to bridge the gap between the civil society and the government. Last thing that to shed light upon is the global barometer. In COP28, we decided that we want to understand how the Arab youth would see the climate change as an issue. These are the numbers that we have managed to see. In 9 countries, we have managed to deploy a survey in 9 countries, 3,678 participants, 70% of them believe that because of a human activity, there is a climate change. And 71% of them have been impacted, especially in Iraq and Sudan. 43% have taken action to protect the environment. Now, what is really optimistic about these data, one of them that I forgot to put it in the slideshow, is that people are willing to work freely when it comes to environment and to counter environmental change because they love environment. This is the main driven, not only like a salary type and so forth. Also, war and conflict are one of the biggest reasons that we need to shed light upon, and it's a multidimensional thing. It's a societal thing, it's a think tank thing, where water scarcity has to be tackled. War and conflict has like $17 trillion, it's an estimation of $17 trillion cost every single year. By investing in peace only, it will increase the GDP by 1 or 2%. And imagine if we could take that 1 or 2% from that 17 trillion and put it in several models in order to empower water scarcity policies and so forth. Therefore, I think when it comes to water scarcity, thankfully that we are dealing, thankfully there is a knowledge, and thankfully there is the decision makers' awareness about it, and most importantly that several speakers have mentioned that we cannot compare water to oil and gas politics. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sultan, for this very statistical perspective into water security. This is a question for Christophe, Laura, as well as Mr. Naidu. A very technical one when it comes to the energy, water, and food security nexus. And its relation, of course, to SDG 6 and how to achieve that. Coming from the United Nations, as well as the Hague Center for Strategic Studies, and as well as the Climate Adaptation Advisor. I want to get your perspective on the relationship between the energy, water, food nexus, as well as SDG 6, and how we could achieve it.
Brilliant. So yeah, if I can start, it's a big question. But I think the first thing is to try to embed this nexus into the different agendas, right? So I think the presidency did very well at trying to embed this nexus, at that early stage. So congratulations on that, and I hope that that continues into the climate. So I think there's two sides to this coin, right? There's like the sort of more climate and energy side, and then there's the more security side. And I think as Laura, you mentioned, there's silos, right? And I think it's breaking down trying to break those silos together. So I think, in the climate discussions, making sure that security and those, type of organizations are included in that discussion. And I think we're trying to do that from a UN perspective in this climate security mechanism in the Security Council. But I think, multilateralism needs to continue and take that forward. I think that we need to, look at climate finance and looking at the global sort of flows of finance as well. And how do you address this nexus into those discussions around climate finance? Somalia recently received from the Global Climate Fund about 100 million recently. And the idea around it is to looking at this idea of climate, water security, and also, insecurity, and trying to address the peace benefits of it. So I think that's a really important part of that. I also think, looking at how do you expand access to financing, so blended finance, the other financial opportunities, investing in different underrepresented groups. I think, looking at creating mechanisms that allow youth, women, local groups to also access the funding for the nexus is really important. And I think, how do we bring that financing for the youth and the underrepresented is really key. But I think promoting co-producing knowledge. And I think, ensuring local communities are not just the data sources, but also co-creative of these water strategies. And I really think that looking at multilateralism at the global, regional, and national level really need to include local and indigenous voices as well. And then I think finally the bit that this panel is also about is how do we strengthen UN think tank and UN think tank and government partnerships to really have these joint dialogues, to do much more around research and pilot sort of innovative programs and really connect this policy and practice line.
Ms. Laura?
Thanks for the question. Oops, excuse me. Thanks for the question. Just to be clear, you were mentioning the water energy food nexus. So it's not the water peace security nexus that you're
No, it's the energy water food nexus.
Yeah, okay. No, I just, think force of habit that I'm always thinking about the WPS. But no, I think that in order to accelerate SDGs, there's, I think, a few remarks made on the panel by some of my esteemed colleagues that I think point to this already, that we need to look both at the way that the multilateral system on the one hand is structured and organized at the moment, and how the silos that I mentioned can be broken, as well as how we can mobilize and engage those relevant sectors into those activities that are connected to accelerating this SDG 6. So what does this mean? It means that indeed we need to revisit how the SDGs are currently approached and supported. I think there's already been quite a bit of discussion and efforts to improve the integration of the SDGs so that there is a more natural platform at the multilateral level to bring together those relevant stakeholders and platforms that are working on those various sectors. But also on the ground in those countries that are particularly affected by these challenges, we need to really double down on efforts to mobilize the right players in the right locations. So this means that we need to strengthen resilience of stakeholders at local, provincial, and national level by ensuring that through information, data, evidence that we need to really double down on efforts to mobilize the right players in the right locations. So this means that we need to strengthen resilience of stakeholders at local, provincial, and national level by ensuring that through information, data, evidence that we can collect, that is actually reached at levels that are currently not being reached. That includes vulnerable communities, but also provincial level authorities, for example, that often are not brought into these conversations enough because they are not aligned with the national government at more global settings, or not involved in those hyper-local activities that are often being supported by NGOs or IGOs. So it's really about tweaking that governance in a way that you can spark more collaboration. We need to really further develop and refine those capacities and methods for policymakers and practitioners in those sectors, that they are better equipped to think beyond their sector-specific priorities and really see how working together across the water, energy, food nexus actually would enhance objectives in all the individual sectors. So it's really about seeing how the greater sum of collaboration could work well. And finally, I think we need to elevate those initiatives and practices that are yielding some promising results. I think it's important that we keep showcasing where things are working well in order to keep people moving and mobilized and energized to move the needle forward, because there's not just one answer to integration of the nexus in SDG 6. It's just a matter of really facilitating what works, and the answer to that could be different in different contexts.
Thank you, Ms. Laura. Mr. Naidu?
Thank you. A few things to add to what's already rich. I mean, the first point I want to make is this nexus approach is quite interesting for a multiplicity of reasons. One, of course, is not only organizing for the breaking down of the silos, but actually learning from the histories and experiences of each part of the nexus. And some of that is proving to be really, really useful. Another thing that I find useful is that the nexus idea has actually accelerated knowledge production for water and energy and food, both individually and collectively. And it's really encouraging that a lot of this new growth in research and research productivity is actually coming out of the global south, which I think is really powerful because it's organizing for much more relevant knowledge to the places that need them really strongly. The second point I want to make is that we need to expand where we are already in this rich repository of knowledge to address those domains where we need newer knowledge around scaling for impact. And here we're talking about things like mechanisms for decision making. I mean, Dr. Amar talked about the process that was in the run-up to COP28 around the inclusivity, which was really powerful. I'm assuming you're going to do the same around next year's summit as well. I hope so. These are really, really important. And this is about acculturating to the mechanisms of not only making decisions, but making decisions in a way that organizes for those very communities to be active in the implementation of those decisions around scaling for impact. But we also have to look at the domains of policy optimization. We're talking about elements of the nexus that have strong individualized traditions of how their regulatory environments work, and the harmonization becomes critically important. In the previous panel, the Egyptian ambassador talked about a corridor concept, which is quite intriguing, around a system of water flow being important not only for water, but also for energy and for logistics. And this is very powerful. And then there's the issue around the economics. And while water has been lagging behind for a long time because energy and food have very developed theses on their economics, the Global Commission for the Economics of Water has now put something on the table that we can all engage with very meaningfully around an equalization. And then maybe the last point in that transdisciplinary format is the whole notion around how you engage innovation for impact, which is really, really important and powerful. But I think there should be one more thing added to that. I mean, the reality of where we are in the world right now and the reality for the next decade is classical security, conflict-related security is the paramount interest in most of the discussions that's happening in the world. And there's been a recognition of this in a bunch of domains, one of which is the African Union. And the African Union has declared itself, for example, on the climate development security nexus. And this security angle becomes critically important around bringing folk to the table at whatever level of the system you're operating. So I think we should be looking at a water, energy, food, and security nexus as we move into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Naidu. Going over to Dr. Amar, you mentioned the UAE consensus, and His Excellency Bilal also mentioned it. When it comes to the outcomes of COP28 that deal specifically with water-related issues, are there any?
Yes, Abdullah. The UAE consensus actually has 6 pillars. For those who are not familiar with the UAE consensus, second pillar of the UAE consensus is the UAE framework for global climate resilience. As the joke goes, if you want to hide something, hide it in page 2 of your Google search results, because people only look at the first page of Google search results. And I think it's true that not many people around the world have heard about the UAE framework, because it's the second page or the second agreement in a set of 6 agreements that together make the UAE consensus. The first being, of course, the Global Stocktake Agreement, the most famous, most quoted by media. So the UAE framework, it's a framework that deals with adaptation. The purpose of this framework, and I've been personally involved in negotiating this framework and drafting the framework itself. The purpose of the framework is to operationalize the global goal adaptation of the Paris Agreement, helping to further explain the goal and helping achieve the global goal of adaptation, and also to help in measuring progress in achieving the goal. So it does all these things, explaining the goal, helping achieving it, and how to measure progress in achieving it. And the UAE framework includes 11 targets. We have 7 thematic targets for 7 themes for adaptation. These are water, a thematic target for water, and a thematic target for food and agriculture, health, infrastructure and human settlements, poverty eradication and livelihoods, and you have a goal for ecosystems and biodiversity, and the 7th goal is for protection of cultural heritage. And just by the titles of these targets, you know that there is some alignment and some inspiration drawn from SDGs. Also, you have 4 dimensional targets. There's a target for impact, vulnerability, and risk assessment, and there's a target for planning, a target for implementation, and the 4th target for monitoring, evaluation, and learning. We think of the 7 thematic targets as the what and where to adapt, if you want to adapt, and the 4 dimensional targets as how to adapt, if you want to adapt. So the UAE framework deals with both what and where to adapt and how to adapt with its 11 targets. Now, you notice that the first thematic target is the target on water. And this target is clearly linked to SDG 6. Also, water has been highlighted as a key issue for adaptation by almost all developing countries in their national adaptation plans and national communications. However, we need to also remember that to adapt and to adapt for water adaptation to take place, you also need to implement the other targets, such as the infrastructure target, the biodiversity target, the health target, because all of them have things to contribute to water adaptation and also water security. And all these targets together work together to achieve the goal of achieving water adaptation. One more thing I would like to say is that, and which takes us a little bit outside of the topic, is that the UAE framework not only aligns its targets with SDGs and SDG 6, but also with different global frameworks in general. So there's an alignment, for example, with the Sentai framework for disaster risk reduction, because we included one of the goals, one of the targets, target G, early warning systems for all, as one of our targets within the dimensional targets of the UAE framework. And also there are a lot of similarities in the biodiversity target with what happened in the convening Montreal framework in 2022. So the philosophy behind the UAE framework was not to create one more global framework that sits there isolated from other global frameworks, but instead to create a framework that supports implementation of existing frameworks, but also provides depth and clarity to an area that has been underserved and urgently needed, which is adaptation.
Thank you, Dr. Amr. And lastly, Sultan. As a researcher, what do you see is the most urgent factor shaping water security when it comes to the MENA today?
Well, it's really quite tangled thing. It's mixture between several things. Let me give you a few digits, Abdullah. In 1974, one person needs 7.2 tons of material. In 2017, they need 14.2 or something, 14.7 tons of material. Not to mention the material increase, but also the population increase and the migration. So there is like a very stress on the water when it comes to the MENA region, and so from every single dimension. It has the political aspect, it has the societal aspect as well, and the economic as well. And to give you an example about it, Abdullah, you see Cairo in Egypt, they have something called Nile is Egypt, and Egypt is the Nile, which is that when His Excellency the Ambassador put up the map, you would see the whole population of Egypt surrounding the river basin from both sides. 11% of the Cairo GDP comes from the agriculture. If that percentage go down because of the water levels and the migration or conflict, whatever, we're talking about more than 1 million people will be without any jobs. So it's very tangled and complicated. Therefore, it's really very hard to say, do they fix the political aspect, or it's the economic or the population?
Thank you, Sultan. And with that, we come to the conclusion of our session. Unfortunately, it didn't take that long. I'd like to thank our speakers, and please a round of applause for this esteemed panelists.